This is winter. Tell us a bit about, first of all, where the idea came from, if you could.
Yeah, so This is Winter is an exhibition that's on at the House of Manannan at the moment, and it's also an online collection of photographs as well. This is Winter has been drawn from a fantastic archive that we hold at Manx National Heritage, which is the Manx Press Pictures Archive.
So it's largely from newspapers, is that right?
Absolutely. So in the late 1950s, a Manx photographer, Bill Peters, set up the Manx Press Pictures business, if you like, and he was contracted by the two main newspapers of the time, the Isle of Man Times and the Isle of Man Examiner. So pretty much every community-based photograph you see in the newspapers from the late 1950s to the 1970s were taken by Bill Peters and his colleague John Madrell, who joined him in the 60s. And John Madrell, indeed, still photographer for Isle of Man newspapers today. So when that business folded and when Peter sadly died in the 1980s, the entire archive of negatives were donated to Manx National Heritage. Some 22,000, that's a conservative estimate, of 120 millimetre negatives that weren't really indexed. They were just grouped by date order. So you could, there's a little brown envelope and it would say November 1966, and then it would have very obscure references. So it might just say woman on beach or elephant on prom or big hole.
Does this mean someone's had to go through and
yes, sort of
pick the interesting bits? Or
that archive has been accessible to readers to the reading room, but of course they're negative, so you have to get a light box. It's pretty much hit and miss. So if you knew there was a photograph you were particularly looking for from the papers, you knew which month it was in, there's a fair chance you'd find it, but it was a very laborious process. And of course, if everyone's handling the negatives, that's very damaging to the negatives. Plus, we didn't have an index. So 4 or 5 years ago, a rudimentary index was put together using those sort of very loose headlines, like I say, elephant on prom, with a date. So we had an index. And then in 2016, we decided to have some of those images digitised so that they could be more accessible. And we did it very subjectively, I suppose. We had the index in front of us and we just chose at random 1,000 images that we thought sounded intriguing. So, it was Ken Dodd and some brownies. We'd pick that, not through looking at them, just through this sort of paper exercise.
These are scenes that people will remember, of course, from
absolutely.
Kind of the 60s and the 70s.
Mostly 60s and 70s, a very few from the late 50s. So we had 1,000 of them digitised for a project in 2016 called This is Summer, which, as it suggests, it was images from the summer months. So we were capturing that sort of tourist heyday. There were lots of local people in the pictures as well, but it was very much the sort of glamour and movement and energy of the summer. And that was really, really popular. All those images are still available online. So we decided to complete the project, or this phase of the project anyway, to do the winter months because they were lacking. So we did exactly the same process, had 1,000 of them digitised. We released them in early October. And from that 1,000, I curated 60 or so for the exhibition that you can see at the House of Manannan, which is running until March. But the rest of the images are available now from our iMuseum site and will be there forever. So you can have a look and see if you can spot yourself.
Any particular highlights for you?
Yeah, very much so. I remember I made the selection and my colleagues in the library helped with retrieval of the negatives, and then I was actually off on maternity leave. So when I came back, all the images were ready for me to make the selection from. So it was a really nice thing to come back to. But the very first group of pictures I saw was there was just an oven. That was just a picture of an oven. There was a picture of a hole in the road. There was a picture of a woman with a mop and bucket. And I was thinking, oh my goodness, I've made a really strange selection here. I'm going to make an exhibition of it. But then, of course, as I started looking, I found fantastic ones, but really different from the summer images. So you've got a lot more of local people. So there's none of the celebrities and the glamorous bathing beauty girls in these shots. It's Manx women at work and play. There's a lot more of weather-related events as well, obviously because it's been the winter. People tended to get up to their protesting in the winter months as well. So once the tourists have gone, so you've got stories about the birch, the campaigning pro-birch and anti-birch in this time period. You've got there's a lovely group of photographs called Oap Revolution, which is people in the 70s campaigning for equality of winter fuel allowance with their counterparts in the UK. There's the Faux Halloo movement, which was in the 60s, there was a big move to get new residents to the Isle of Man, and the types of residents that were coming here were perhaps not so sympathetic to the Manx way of life. So you've got this counter movement happening, and all of these images are appearing in the winter months. And I don't know where that would be, whether people just had more time on their hands in the winter. But there's some lovely ones as well. There's loads and loads of social groups having their Christmas do's as we do now. So lots of groups of very well-dressed women having their WI dinners, and then loads of groups of just men with cigarettes hanging out of their mouths for various male-related events. So there's lots and lots of them. And what I'm doing on Sunday, this Sunday coming, at 2:00 at the House of Manannan, I'm doing a talk about some of the photographs and their stories in the newspapers. So I think I said at the beginning that these photographs came with very basic indexing. So trying to think. Well, the one I said about Hole in the Road, it was just called Hole in Road. But then when I found the actual photograph in the newspaper, I found the newspaper story that goes with it. And actually, suddenly, they start to become more intriguing, these stories. So I've done a bit of research in the newspapers, which is a really quite laborious process, because you have to try and spot that image through scrolling through the microfilm that we have in the library. So people are going to be very disappointed if they think all 1,000 images have the full newspaper story attached. They don't. And we are actually actively asking people, if you recognise people in the photograph, you were at that event, you know the scene, you can just type it in straight away from home into that photograph, and it will start to build the social picture of what was going on behind the photographs. So I'm doing a talk of 60 or so images that I have done some work to reveal the stories behind. And I've gone, because it's Christmassy, Christmas time, I've gone very lightweight. They're quite jovial stories. There's some really quirky photographs I found as well. So it's going to be a jolly afternoon, maybe an hour or so at the House of Manannan, and tickets are available on our website or from the House of Manannan as well. And it's £5 per person.
It's billed as being quite lightweight and quite full of a bit of festive quirkiness, perhaps.
Festive fun.
It's quite an important social history project as well, and you've mentioned some of the kind of socio-political contexts from the 60s and 70s which are being uncovered in these pictures. So
very much so.
Covers quite a range of tones.
It does cover a range of tones, you're quite right. So one of the things I'm going to talk about is Lieutenant Governor Garvey, who came to the Isle of Man in the 50s, and some of the real sweeping changes he made to the island at a time when the tourist industry was in real decline, and at a time when the economic future of the Isle of Man was looking pretty bleak, actually, and particularly young people were leaving the Isle of Man to seek, year-long round employment. And some of the things he did was invest very heavily in the tourist industry. The 60s and 70s saw huge investments in tourism. And in fact, I read a statistic before that in 1970, tourism spend, the budget for the tourism department was 200,000. By the end of the 70s, it was nearer $1 million. So there was a lot of investment going in. There was big infrastructure There was big infrastructure projects on Douglas Promenade. So the new sea terminal, for example, the casino.
Sounds familiar almost there.
Yeah, really, really similar. The casino itself brought some brilliant stories. So in the This Is Summer exhibition, we had the photographs of it opening and all the excitement of that, but in the winter you've got this brilliant photograph of 4 American guys who were arrested for fraud it was the Castlemona casino at the time, and the story that goes with that, which involves shotguns and late night raids, and there's some really quite gritty stories in there, really surprising stories. You wouldn't expect a local advocate and a local accountant to have a pistol drawn at them at a casino on the Isle of Man. So I'm revealing some of these stories as well. And the building boom that was happening in the Isle of Man in the 60s and 70s, and how very unpopular that was with a lot of local people, rightly so, where there seemed to be quite a relaxing of planning laws, and not necessarily, perhaps there was some money exchanging hands. I don't know, but it's easy for me to say because I wasn't around then.
So what's next? Are we going to see This Is Spring? Or
Well, we have actually covered, we were quite generous with our months of summer and our months of winter, so we have actually covered the whole year. I think summer stretch from May to September and winter's October to April, so we've covered a whole year. But yeah, it's an archive that it's a wonderful resource for the island, and it's a resource we'll keep tapping into. And at the talk, I'll explain how you can access that resource as well, and how we can continue to add to, as you say, the social history record of those photographs. And it's such an important resource for us, because at the museum we have fantastic Edwardian, late Victorian photographs that do show the Isle of Man growing and developing. But this is it's a living memory resource, and so it is relatively unusual to have such a wealthy archive like that to draw on. So we're all delighted, and we're always delighted by the response we get to it. If we put a photograph on our social media just last week, and we had people, it was of Douglas Promenade in the snow, and we had so many comments, so many people got really excited about that particular snowstorm, and then remembering, because it was Christmas Eve, and they remember walking home in it. So we're capturing those memories, and it's fantastic.
Quite an evocative memory. I think I saw that picture actually, but I just wanted finally to ask you about, you mentioned the sort of subjective process of trying to pick what to use or what to look at or what to explore. Yeah. There's also a subjective process about what to keep, because I imagine there are an awful lot of things that the museum and Manx National Heritage more generally is given, which it has to make decisions about.
Yeah, we have a very strong collecting policy, actually. I mean, we're going off the subject somewhat, but we do have a collecting policy, and we have a collections forum, which is it's a group of individuals at Manx National Heritage that sit and debate these things, what should come into the collection. So it's not just one person thinking, oh, I like the look of that, I'll take that in. And we don't accept everything that we're offered. Sometimes we go out and try and acquire things actively if we're trying to fill a gap in our collections, which is something we're doing at the moment with our new TT gallery. So it's we try to be as objective as we can be by having a broad group of people that sit. And when we have to discuss storage costs, how much is it going to cost to store that object, for example. But with archives it's slightly different. I don't actually usually work in the archives team. I've been invited in just to work on this project and work with the team there, but they're slightly different because they do have a legal function to collect certain bits and pieces, so they're slightly different to the physical collection side of things. But you do have to be selective, of course, because we could collect everything, couldn't we, really? Everything's connected to the Isle of Man in some way.